This is One Great Earth. My name is Dan. Thank you for viewing, for watching this channel tonight. Got a couple of things to get into. This in from Sudan. We need the world to wake up. Sudan facing world's deadliest famine in 40 years. Millions face disaster as Sudanese Army and Rapid Support Forces, or as a RSF, accused of using food access as a weapon in an ongoing war. Sudan is facing a famine that could become worse than any of the world has seen since Ethiopia 40 years ago, U.S. officials have warned. As aid deliveries continue to be blocked by the warring armies, but arms supplies to both sides continue to flow in. With much of the world's attention focused on Gaza, the scene of another human-made famine, Sudan is already the worst humanitarian crisis in the world and is slipping towards a humanitarian disaster of historic proportions, with far less media coverage and global concern. A UN humanitarian appeal for the country has received only 16% of the funds it needs. We need the world to wake up to the catastrophe happening before our very eyes. Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, told reporters. She was speaking as El Fasher, the capital of the North Darfur region and a former humanitarian hub, faced its second month under siege by the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF is a paramilitary group that has been fighting the Sudanese armed forces since April 2023, when a power struggle between two rival generals, the SFS Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, the country's de facto ruler, and RSS Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti, escalated into a conflict that has split the country. The civil war has already killed 14,000 people and forced 10 million to flee their homes. Just in 1 year, the civil war has already killed 14,000 people and forced 10 million to flee their homes due to the fighting, the warring between two armies. Just break out in Khartoum. And the violence escalates and travels elsewhere. The UN Security Council adopted a UK draft resolution on Thursday demanding an end to the Al Fasher siege, but the fighting escalated on Friday, with the SFF as claiming to have repelled a major RSF assault, inflicting huge losses. The head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, said there were concerns over what would happen to the people sheltering in Al Fasher if the town fell to the RSF. That force has largely been recruited from the Janjaweed militias who carried out massacres while fighting on the Khartoum government side in the Darfur genocide of 2003 to 2005. The RSF is on the march, and where the RSF has gone in the Darfur area historically and in this conflict, mass atrocities have followed, Power said. On Friday, she announced $315 million in new U.S. humanitarian assistance for Sudan, but said hardly any aid was reaching isolated populations. Both sides have been accused of using control over food access as a weapon. The RSF has been systematically looting humanitarian warehouses, stealing food and livestock, destroying grain storage facilities, and wells in the most vulnerable Sudanese communities. The USAID chief added, the SAF completely contradicts its commitments and its responsibilities to the Sudanese people by having shut down cross-border access from Chad at the Adre crossing, which is the main route for assistance to enter the Darfur region. Power said General Burhan could open the Adre crossing with a stroke of a pen. The SAF have offered another access point from Chad, the Tyne crossing, but U.S. officials says it is already obstructed and inadequate for the needs of the population will become impassable for the coming rainy season. The really clear message here is that it is an obstruction, not insufficient stocks of food, that is driving force behind the historic and deadly levels of starvation in Sudan, Power said. She added that the current data suggested that the crisis is comparable to and potentially worse than a 2011 famine in Somalia that killed 250,000 people. I would add that the most worrying scenario would be that Sudan would become the deadliest famine since Ethiopia in the early 1980s. She added, the Ethiopian famine killed 1 million people between 1983 to 1985, according to UN estimates. Thomas Greenfield said that in a worst-case scenario, a famine in Sudan could become even more lethal. We've seen mortality projections estimated that in excess of 2.5 million people, about 15% of the population in Darfur and Kordofan, the hardest hit regions, could die by the end of September, the ambassador said. This is the largest humanitarian crisis on the face of the planet, and yet somehow it threatens to get worse. While humanitarian aid has faced constant obstruction, both sides in the war continue to receive weapons, the U.S. official says. The SAF from Russia and Iran, among others, and the RSF in particular from the United Arab Emirates, UAE, a U.S. ally. Thomas Greenfield said Washington had engaged with the UAE on the issue. However, a White House account on a poolside meeting between Joe Biden and the UAE's Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan at the G7 summit in Italy did not mention Sudan. The U.S. faces accusations of hypocrisy from many countries, particularly in the global south, as Washington calls for an end to weapons supplies for two parties involved in the conflict in Darfur and Sudan, while continue to provide billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel during its offensive on Gaza. Cannot ignore the hypocrisy by any stretch of the word, giving billions of dollars so Israel can use their least of smart weapons on what they call. They want Gaza to become a graveyard for many reasons. But if we look at Sudan, can we already see what that graveyard would look like? Food aid is being blocked, even though that the US dollar aid is going through to be able to purchase that aid. It is being blocked, taken, stolen, destroyed. These are tactics that Russia does in Ukraine, if it didn't already seem too familiar. Burning grain silos, it's too much of the same. You would imagine. They even specifically state the SAF from Russia and Iran. I wouldn't consider this an ally of Russia and Iran because I don't think this organization's paramilitary outfit would survive the civil war. It's going to be grueling. There's going to be bloodshed non-stop, starvation, and no support except weapons. Only weapons are going through to Sudan. This is a crime against nature, crime of humanity, and yet there is nothing we can do. Again, as another war breaks out, using foreign aid and weapons to dominate. You have one side that has nothing, and the other side that has all the greatest weapons in the world. There is no justice in this world. There is only people trying to survive, people suffering, and those that inflict. I see why so many people are quick to jump to the bandwagon of inflicting, no matter how unethical it can be, no matter how much sleep they lose. This is a horror show. Actual famine in the millions. This could be far greater than what you would consider hunger. Famine goes deeper than hunger. Famine spreads like a contagion, both economic, physically, everything. There's nothing to eat. People eating white clay from the ground in Madagascar. When true famine takes hold, there is no report that I could read. There's no organization or charity that I could help set up to marathon something for charity drive. The money and aid is already getting there. The food is already getting there, but it's being removed. It's being destroyed, and it's being taken. Grain silos being caught on fire, a familiar sight in Ukraine. They burn their grain, their wheat, their fields, and they become actual killing fields as they take the farmers out and execute them in the fields. Civil war has already killed 14,000 people and forced 10 million to flee their homes. 10 million is the same amount of people that evacuated Ukraine. These are not small numbers by any stretch of the imagination of what 10 million could be. 10 million that fled Ukraine due to a war. 10 million fled Sudan due to a war. Where do you think these people go? Do they all try to go to Egypt, as in the stories that we read earlier? Bloodshed will not end. I don't think this is like Eritrea and Ethiopia, where that bloody war raged for 2 years into a ceasefire. This is much more devastating on a humanitarian level. You have people starving to death that are literally around bombs, gunfire all day. Those that survive in the city somehow, after a constant onslaught of weapons that are always going in one direction or another. There's no surviving. There's no food, there's no water. And any kind of shelter could be damaged beyond it becomes remaining shelter. If homes are continuing to be bombed, that's the other Russian aspect of the combat, is the destruction of civilian infrastructure, where you have 90% of your weapons targeting civilian infrastructure. For what purpose? Take over, dominate, spread Russia throughout the world. If Ukraine did not pause Russia in the fighting, Russia would have tried to invade Japan. Fact. We don't know what else would have happened if Ukraine would have been unable to not only slow down Russia, but to beat them back so they could not capitalize on Japan. As Japan had no defense spending since World War II, now they do. They did not want a ready Japan. So already they're angry. They're angry, and China is angry with them. Both with nuclear weapons, nuclear armaments. Definitely at the ready, as everybody has theirs at the ready. NATO has some supplies that they're being more transparent on. But NATO is not a country. So if NATO were to strike back at a country that attacked a NATO country with a nuclear weapon, I mean, the country that is attacked would be the one, in hindsight, always thinking that it would be the country being attacked that would respond back. not a third-party army, a world army. NATO is not in Ukraine. NATO is not in Darfur. Is the amount of escalations as well, the amount of fires, detonations, explosions, all have effects on the carbon budget on the planet. So when people take into account that we have X amount of millions of carbon dioxide in our air due to this country, they're not including military. They're not including all these massive explosions, these oil refineries that get blown up. It all adds up rapidly. We have a carbon clock of less than 5 years. We have on our planet what is equivalent to a very small bubble that we call home. There is nothing else. People that can't think of another continent existing outside of their backyard are lost, I believe. There's no reaching these people. They're still so stuck in their self-arrogance. I'm sorry, I digress. It is unfortunate to hear that the fighting still continues and rages on with no end in sight, while millions try to run and survive. There are too many millions of people that are trying to survive instead of having a stable, productive life. And it looks like a lot of it has to do with Russia. It always comes back to Russia. Somehow, it eventually comes back to Russia. They are a pestilence on society globally, as they believe that Russia should be global. Their influence should be of all authority. They want to rule with an iron fist globally. They want to establish an anti-NATO organization. Don't remember what the name of it is. I haven't heard about it in a couple of years, so I don't even know if it's something that is still mulled over. But this alliance with North Korea, Iran, and Russia, among others. But I recall that nobody else was signing with them, so the sanctions probably is what did it, I imagine, because Russia is going to have to sell a lot of fuel if they ever want to get out of the black, or no, even out of the red. FEMA, dozens of groups push FEMA to recognize extreme heat as a major disaster. By Manuela Adriani, the New York Times. This is the Seattle Times, is what originally this was from the New York Times article. Dozens of environmental, labor, and healthcare groups banded together on Monday to file a petition to push the Federal Emergency Management agency to declare extreme heat and wildfire smoke as major disasters like floods and tornadoes. The petition is a major push to get the federal government to help states and local communities that are straining under the growing cost of climate change. If accepted, the petition could unlock FEMA funds to help localities prepare for what? If accepted, the petition could unlock FEMA funds to help localities prepare for heat waves and wildfire smoke by building cooling centers or installing air filtration systems in schools. The agency could also help. No, I'm not going to yell in his ear. The agency could also help during emergencies by paying for water distribution, health screenings for vulnerable people, and increased electricity use. Major disaster declarations really open up the broadest pockets of funding that FEMA has available, said John Su, a senior attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity, an environmental group and the lead author of the petition. State and local governments are severely ill-equipped and underfunded to even deal with emergency measures. The support of major labor groups such as the AFL-CIO and the Service Employees International Union is part of a broader strategy from unions to create protection for the tens of millions of people working outside or without air conditioning during heat waves. Unions want the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to require employers to protect workers from extreme temperatures. The White House has pushed officials at the Labor Department, which oversees OSHA, to publish a draft heat regulation this summer, but major business and industry groups, such as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are opposed to any of the new requirements. Labor groups and workers' rights organizations hope that if the petition to FEMA is accepted, there would be more pressure for employers to address heat in the workplace. If extreme heat and wildfire smoke are designated as major disasters, then it's all hands on deck, said Kristen Bolanos, the communications director of Workers' Defense Project, a nonprofit focused on labor rights. A major disaster classification, she said, would force OSHA to make heat worker protections a priority. The move underscores the growing concerns about the impact of extreme heat among lawmakers, activists, and labor groups. Last June, Representative Ruben Gallego, Democrat of Arizona, introduced legislation to declare extreme heat a major disaster under FEMA's classification. The bill, which has not progressed, was co-sponsored by 11 Democrats but just one Republican. Heat already kills more people in the United States each year than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined, according to the National Weather Service. Still, the tools to address the consequences of extreme temperatures are being built from scratch. None of the world's institutions, data tools, data sets, etc. are fit for a purpose to respond to the size of extreme heat for communities, said Kathy Bachman-McLeod, the CEO of Climate Resilience for All, a nonprofit focused on addressing extreme heat globally. Over the years, FEMA had denied several similar requests to declare some past heat waves major disasters, including one by California Governor Gavin Newsom in October 2022. After a record-breaking triple-digit heat dome formed over the state, at the time, the agency argued that precedent is to evaluate discrete events and impacts, not the seasonal or general atmospheric conditions. The 1988 Stafford Act, which authorizes the federal government to declare a disaster or emergency, does not explicitly include extreme heat in its list of 16 causes. But the labor and environmental group's petition argues that the agency declared the coronavirus pandemic a major disaster, even though it was also absent from the list, opening a precedent the groups hope to exploit. Petitioners plan to litigate the matter if FEMA again denies the request. Declaring extreme heat events as major disasters could pose challenges for FEMA. Generally, The agency declares disasters based on how much uninsured public infrastructure was damaged and how many people died. But during heat waves, damaged property is not the main risk, and counting heat-related deaths is difficult, in part because death certificates don't always reflect the role heat played into a person's death. During disasters, communities that don't prepare for extreme heat events can sometimes receive more funds than communities that do, said Brock Long, who was the administrator of FEMA during the Trump administration. Long said he worries that adding new items to the list of FEMA's major disasters, like strapping new parts to an old rusty bicycle frame. I think FEMA's a little more robust than an old rusty bike. It's time for Congress. I'm not going to read the rest of his. If FEMA accepts the petition, it would launch a process to amend its rules to include extreme heat and wildfire smoke as possible major disasters and accept public comment. So this is something to fight for workers' rights, especially as a medical diagnosis of extreme heat, exhaustion. Extreme heat can be a killer. It is a killer, but one of the biggest killers, weather-related killers in the United States. And they're going to have to litigate and sue to try to get this on the books. It feels like there's a good chance, a lot of support behind it, and it is something that definitely needs to be necessary going forward as we see these temperatures in the Northeast, Midwest, the South, and the Southwest. Excess of 100 degrees. The Midwest and Northeast seeing temperatures of over 90, 95 degrees and over 75, 80 degrees at night. These are very uncomfortable days and nights, and this heat wave is going to last a week at least. There is no end in sight for this heat wave for now. And without recognizing the heat wave, how are you going to call off if you are literally too exhausted after working too much in the sun, too much in the heat? You can't get up. You can't get yourself physically up. There's nothing that you can do about it when you are so sick from the sun, so sick from the heat. There is a limit on a human body, and that is what this is about. This isn't trying to get free breaks. This is trying to get your health. Come out in one piece from the job. You don't want to have to leave a little bit of yourself, or in this case, a lot of yourself at every job site. You're working outdoors in 110 degrees. It's extreme. And it's happening in greater regions than probably originally estimated, with where the hottest parts of the country are going to be by this time. I didn't see anybody saying that Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania would be up there. And that happened quick. It was 80 degrees by 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, followed by just alarming increases of heat all across the country. And this is only going to get worse by Wednesday. This is already going to be pushing it. Because people are having to survive in this kind of heat. People have to recognize what kind of damage this can do onto their body. And it's scary for people that have no choice. People that have to work out in extreme conditions without any thought of their humanity. I've worked jobs before where they wouldn't care if you were alive or dead. They don't care. Move it along. And to think that somebody's faking is what, you would always expect. Oh, you're just faking it. and that person dies. If the extreme heat that the person would be working in was a major disaster, and he was working in it and died in it, and the person ignored him, that would be on his head. He was looking for permission to be able to take a break because it's too hot to work. It's too hot to do whatever it is. This is scary. And this is getting into the territory of peak temperatures that you would expect before the lakes start to heat up in the Great Lakes. Great Lakes had a pretty mild winter. There was no lake ice. This is a signal, or a canary. This was the canary anyway. Now we're seeing the extreme heat that is just radiating all down upon the United States and all across the country. At least 3/4 of the country is under significant heat, with anomalies being West Texas and New Mexico. There's a new wildfire in New Mexico as well, and there is extreme weather all over the place. It becomes dry, it becomes moist, the humidity is just so bizarre. We won't know the full effects of the damage of heat, but we are just one blackout in a major city away from a mass casualty event. People won't be able to survive in 110-degree weather when it gets to be just 90 to 100 degrees at night. That's insane to think about. It is, think that 80 degrees at night, 110 degrees during the day, and you have no air conditioning, no way of cooling down. Even then, at some points, air conditioner won't cut it at some temperatures because it's just overwhelming. Just because you set it to 68 degrees doesn't mean that it's going to keep a pump at 68 degrees. To worry about where your thermostat is. It's amazing that we saw all this happening, just unfolding in front of our eyes for months, and signals of intense heat here and there. Now it's full swing, and there is a heat dome over the Northeast that's going to last there for at least a week. It is a massive high pressure system in the Northeast off the coast, and it is putting some insane numbers out. Tuesday, really hot. This is probably one of the most major heat waves I think I've seen in the United States. It's gonna be hotter in the Northeast than it is in Florida. That's bizarre. Too hot. Second thought, where is, yeah. This was the fire weather outlook for today. Pretty incredible, just massive. I mean, that is most of California, is a quarter of California. These are massive. Like, so nobody light a fire in these areas because it could be deadly. Fire could run away. And all that, oh, it's just the critical part, okay. It's just measuring the critical. That is some scary unknown amount of red flags. $11 dead, dozens missing. This goes in hand with what we've been talking about, as in the new documentary, the BBC documentary, Dead Calm, Killing in the Med. I believe you can be watched now. I have to check that out. But this is more tragedy in the Mediterranean. 11 dead, dozens missing, and 2 shipwrecks. 26 children are among those believed to be missing, Doctors Without Borders said. At least 11 people have died and more than 60 are missing as a result of 2 shipwrecks off the coast of southern Italy, rescuers say. German charity rescue ship said it picked up 51 people from a sinking wooden boat and found 10 bodies trapped in the lower deck near the island of Lampedusa on Monday. That's Greece? Is that an Italian island, but we're going to hear about what Coast Guard was coming up. In a separate incident on the same day, more than 60 people were reported missing, with 26 of them feared to be children, Doctors Without Borders said. The boats were carrying migrants who had set off from Libya and Turkey, UN agency said. Survivors of the shipwreck near Lampedusa were handed over to the Italian Coast Guard and taken ashore on Monday morning, while the deceased were being towed to the island, according to the rescue ship. The boat had set off from Libya and was carrying migrants from Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, said in a joint statement. The other shipwreck was located about 125 miles off the coast of Calabria in southern Italy, the agency said. One of the surviving 12 people died after disembarking, the Italian Coast Guard said. Doctors Without Borders' Shakila Mohammadi said she heard from survivors that 66 people were unaccounted for, including at least 26 children, some only a few months old. Entire families from Afghanistan are presumed dead. They left from Turkey 8 days ago and had taken in water for 3 to 4 days. They told us they had no life vest and some vessels did not stop to help them, she said in a statement. The Mediterranean is the deadliest known migration route in the world. More than 23,500 migrants have died or gone missing in its waters since 2014, 10 years ago, according to UN data. Heartbreaking amount of loss, mostly children. All right. I thank you for your time. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and motivates me to keep putting out content similar to this. I thank you, and please take care. Well, I think I'm done. At 3. Oh, wait. I have a Patreon. One Great Earth. All one word, One Great Earth. Patreon.com. It's also in the description of this video. If you could please click the free membership. I'm trying to establish a bit of a community here, and I'm just trying to get a grasp of it. There's also a $5 tier, which I would read out names of members after each stream. Which for this, I have 4. Danny, Ashley, Michonne, and Sarah. Those are the 4 names. And I think that's all that I have for right now. I thank you again. Please take care.